everybody. I'm Ric Orlando. It's May, but it's very chilly. And the next podcast coming up from We Are Upstate, my special guest is Meaghan Frank. She is the great-granddaughter of the original Constantine Frank, who was one of the legends of the American wine industry. And Dr. Frank is one of the wines that makes the Finger Lakes one of the great wine regions of the country. It's about Riesling. It's not just about Riesling. Stick around. Frank Wineries was named one of the top 100 wineries of the year for 2019 from Wine Spectator. Fantastic stuff. Fantastic interview. Thank you for We Are Upstate and joining me. You can go to my website, ricorlando.com. We also, I'm asking you please to go on Apple Podcasts and give us a review, because the more reviews we get, the more we move up the ladder in views. And we're trying to promote upstate New York, trying to turn people on to all the great things that are happening in upstate. Even with this COVID going on, everybody's creating. We are full of makers, we are full of chefs, we are full of beverages. We Are Upstate. I'm Ric Orlando. Enjoy the next 45 minutes. Welcome to We Are Upstate New York. My name is Ric Orlando. On this podcast, you'll be meeting the chefs, the beverage makers, the farmers, the craftspeople, and everyone else that makes upstate New York such a cool place. You never thought of us as trend-setting? Hey, where do you think the term farm to table came from anyway? Hi, I'm Ric Orlando. Welcome to We Are Upstate New York, a podcast where we're celebrating all the great things happening north of New York City, and there's a lot of it. Today, my special guest is Meaghan Frank. Meaghan Frank is part of the great wine family from the Finger Lakes of Dr. Frank, Dr. Constantine Frank, and Chateau Frank. Good morning, Meaghan.
Good morning, Ric. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I love your backdrop. I want to come visit you now. Look at that. The sun is up. Grapes are in full bloom. Wow, what a fantasy.
Yes. Yeah, you have to come visit us. We'd love to host you.
Yeah. So before we talk about the winery in depth, tell me a little bit about you. You obviously work in the winery. Is that all you've done in your life, or have you done other things?
Sure. Yeah, so our winery is now in our fourth generation, which is really exciting. So I joined the business back in 2013. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of three children, and there are two girls and a boy. I'm the oldest. Okay. And from birth, it was really my brother that was destined to enter into the family business.
What's your brother's name?
Kyle, and his middle name is Constantine.
Kyle so Constantine really, Frank. That's a royal sounding name.
Yes. So basically, really, from a very young age, he was pushed to, take over the family business. And my sister and I ran the complete opposite direction. We wanted nothing to do with the business. And everything sort of changed when I was at Cornell University in the agriculture and life sciences school. Okay. And we had to take a certain number of science courses, to fulfill our requirements. I ended up taking quite a few wine classes there. And that's really where I fell in love with wine. And at the same moment, my brother, who's 2 years younger, was just finding that it wasn't his right path. Then, at the same time, I was thinking wine, and my father was really excited that I was excited about wine.
So how old were you when you started working for the winery?
Yeah, so after Cornell, my dad he felt it was important for me to really make sure that this was going to be my career path. Mm-hmm. So he suggested I apply for a program in Australia, University of Adelaide. Wow. And it's a Master of Wine Business program. And so I entered into that in 2011. I loved, the Australian wine industry. I really enjoyed my my schooling there, and I met lots of other people in the wine industry there. So I returned home 2013. I went back to Cornell for winemaking because I felt like I sort of needed that in order to run a winery.
Know your bones. Yeah, it's good to know the bones.
And so I've been really full-time since 2015, and it's been a real exciting time for me to see, the region change so much, even in just the last few years since I've been here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Finger Lakes is finally doing two things at the same time. It's getting its due, but I think it's
Hmm.
also focusing on what we do best in the Finger Lakes, which I think is really important. I was out in Napa a few years ago, and I was with a bunch of wine writers and winemakers, and all they wanted to talk about was Finger Lakes Riesling because they can't do it. It's the one thing they really can't do well in California is Riesling. They do it, but it's not great. And they talked about your winery and a bunch of the other ones, and they were just excited that oh, you guys have this great Riesling. And I was like, out in Napa, I was like, oh yeah, we do. That's right. Yeah, talk about
Wow.
us. But it is really happening now. The international wine press has discovered you and really taking you seriously, right? That's probably made your job much more exciting and fulfilling, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it's amazing. Actually, we have our wines available for sale now in California. We have a distributor.
Hmm.
And I went out to visit my brother, and I did a little sales trip. And I was actually in Napa,
Hmm.
and I was bracing myself, giving myself a little bit of a pep talk before the day started, because I just figured, they're not going to be interested at all, in Riesling and Gewürztraminer and
Hmm.
Grüner Veltliner. They have their own wine scene. I do kind of take it personally when people, reject us.
Well, of
So
course you
I
do.
just I had to emotionally prepare. And actually, we sold more that day than, we did in San Francisco and, parts of New York City, because people really, like you said, Rick, they understand, that we are really the perfect region, well suited to produce these cool climate aromatic varieties.
Yeah. And, again, the California wine scene, which I respect a lot and have a lot of
Hmm.
friends in the industry, they have a particular flavor profile because of their climate.
Sure.
And what I love about wines from our region is so many chefs like me cook with so many flavors from around the world, and your
Mm,
wines just work with that food, which is
sure.
great. Never have a situation where it's like, oh my God, this wine is way too big for the food, or this wine is way too fatty for the food. It's great food wine. So
Sure.
you are, what is your actual title?
Yeah, so my title is vice president.
Oh, wow.
So basically, I manage the day-to-day operations of the
Hmm.
farm. And I love it because every day is completely different,
Yeah.
which I'm sure it's similar for you in your career as well.
Hmm.
And that's what
I
makes
don't
it so
count on nature
exciting.
as much as you do.
Sure.
I mean, a little bit. A snowstorm may hurt me, but you know.
Sure.
So what are some of the? We'll talk about the rewards, but let's talk about some
Uh-huh.
of the challenges of growing grapes. Where exactly is your winery?
Yes, so we're on the west side of Cuca Lake. So the
Okay.
Finger Lakes is a collection of 11 lakes. Most people would assume it's 10 lakes because
Mm-hmm.
we have 10 fingers,
Mm-hmm.
but actually there's one extra finger on there.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of
and the,
incest back in Europe in the days.
yeah. And basically, the Finger Lakes, really these deep glacial lakes are the reason why we can grow these delicate European wine varieties.
Hmm.
So, during the last ice age, about 10,000 years ago, glaciers receded and they carved out these very deep bodies of water. So where we are, you can actually see behind me
Hmm.
on Cuca Lake. Cuca Lake's almost 200 feet deep,
Yeah.
and Seneca Lake, where we have additional vineyard sites, is over 600 feet deep,
Oh
and that's
wow, I didn't realize it was that deep. Yeah.
incredibly deep. So what the deep lakes do is they actually moderate our climate. So we get cooling breezes in the summer and warming airflow through the winter. And the
Hmm.
winter, you mentioned challenges. The winter is our Achilles heel.
Of
In
course.
Napa
Yeah.
they have fires, and
France, they have
other
droughts
issues.
now. They're having a lot of droughts in Bordeaux, right?
Sure,
Yeah, and those high
frost
high
in
temperatures.
Burgundy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the toughest thing for us is the cold winters.
Hmm.
So anytime it gets below negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which it does occasionally, that is like the kill zone. So what we do a few things to mitigate, these pressures. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing is actually Constantine, um, who was my great grandfather. He
Mm-hmm.
actually pioneered this technique to the region, where he took a plow and would basically mound up a foot of soil to protect the graft union,
Yeah.
which is the union between the American rootstock with the European scion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most vulnerable part of the vine. So that's something we do every year after harvest. It's very labor intensive because you have to hill up and then hill down this time of year in the
Mm-hmm.
spring. And, we just really depend on this moderating influence from the lake. We try to pick sites that are reasonably close to the lake to maximize that warming potential. But really, that's our biggest challenge viticulturally.
So so you're specializing obviously in grapes that could take the cold better. Are a lot of those vines have they been hybridized through some of the knowledge you've gotten from Cornell, or are they just naturally that cold weather resistant?
Yeah, so Cornell does develop a few hybrids where they mix, the American varieties like Vitis labresca with Vitis vinifera. So we're only working with 100% Vitis vinifera, the European species.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those cuttings are coming from Europe. So we're really looking at, Riesling is our main variety, but
Mm-hmm.
we do also varieties like, for instance, our Cacciatelli.
Yes, I know. You know what? Let me tell you something about that wine. It is one of my favorite wines, and it is like one of the hardest sells in a restaurant
I
in the world
know.
because normally some guy is out with his date and he wants to be a real cool guy, and he's
Hmm.
never going to say a word he can't pronounce. So I'll just say, "Hey, I got a great wine for you," and bring it over, and they're always really happy. And they say, "How do you pronounce it?" I'm like, "Just call it the Big R."
The big
It's
R.
it's a hard one, but it's tell me a little bit about that wine and say it
Sure.
slowly so people know what it is, because I think it's a wine that everybody who loves, you know, delicious, deeply flavored, crisp white wine should try.
Yes, Rick, I knew you were going to say that you loved it because it is a wine for foodies,
Hmm.
100%. It pairs so beautifully with a variety of cuisines.
Spell it,
So
spell it, spell it, spell it. Can you spell it?
our Cacciatelli, sure, yeah. So the most intimidating thing is it has the R and then followed by a K.
Yes.
So we shorten it to our cat. So it's RKATSITELI.
Okay,
Feel like
that's
I'm
not
in a
so
spelling
bad.
bee.
Yeah, that was very good. Say it again, repeat it. No, that's pretty cool. I
Yes.
mean, I'm Southern Italian, and they have an SF
Oh,
in
right.
used in Italian, like Sfincione and
Uh-huh.
Sfogliadelli, and people say, "How do you say that?" I'm like, just sv, yeah, yeah. Is that so? That ends in an Ellie. Is that a Swiss word, German word,
Yeah, so
Italian
it's
word?
it's actually a grape variety from Georgia. So
From Russia? Oh, wow.
Constantine was Ukrainian. He was born
Hmm.
in Odessa, Ukraine,
Oh, okay.
and he earned his PhD in viticulture there. He spent, 52 years of his life there in Ukraine, working with vines, working with grapes. So when he came to New York, he wanted to plant varieties that he was familiar with, and one of those was Arcatatelli. So it actually has an incredible history. It's the oldest wine grape in the world.
Oh, wow.
It
Really?
dates back to 3000 BC in Georgia.
Hmm.
And the reason that they know that is Georgia is, has an ancient, tradition of producing wine.
Hmm.
And they unearthed these large clay vessels, and that's still very traditional in Georgia to produce, especially Arcatatelli, as an orange wine,
Hmm.
and bury the wine in the earth in these large amphora vessels to mature, due to temperature and a few other factors.
Hmm.
But they unearthed one of these vessels and they found this debris in the bottom of, the amphora, and they
Hmm.
carbon dated. They found them to be seeds from 3000 BC.
Oh my God. That's
Incredible,
amazing, right?
incredible.
That's really cool. And the Ukrainian thing makes sense now. That's
Hmm.
really awesome. Just looking at you, it makes sense. So let's divert a little bit. You mentioned Constantine.
Hmm.
Um, Tell everybody who this Constantine was and why the hell he came to New York and to the Finger Lakes in the first place. I,
Sure. Yeah, Constantine's story I think resonates with a lot of Americans, because it very much embodies, the American dream. He was an immigrant. He, grew up in Ukraine. And it's a complicated story because, Constantine was born into a German enclave. So the family spoke German at home. And they sort of identified as being German. And, Constantine devoted his life to grape growing, to research. After his PhD in viticulture at the Polytechnic University of Odessa, he went on to become a professor. He invented lots of interesting pieces of equipment to make vineyard operations more efficient. And, he really just loved research. He loved the science of grape growing. So all of that kind of came crashing down during World War II because the family, sort of identified as German, but the Germans didn't really see them as German. And when the Soviets, invaded, it was a very bad time, for the family. So they were very lucky to flee. They lived through Constantine and his wife lived through, the Russian Revolution, and then World War One, and then World War II was really a difficult time. So
and
they
funny,
were lucky.
I was thinking about it, being Ukrainian, but identifying as German, they were like the enemy to both sides at
exactly.
one point.
Yeah. Constantine is actually quoted as saying they were people without a home because they, weren't welcome in either place. And where do people go when, they're not welcome? They come to the US. And they were very lucky to have that opportunity. So they came through New York by ship. And, Constantine spoke 9 languages. He was a brilliant man. And he didn't speak a word of English.
Well.
Unfortunately, it would have made things a lot easier. So the only job he could find was working as a dishwasher at night. So, the family had, they were a well-respected family in Odessa. It was 3 children. Constantine's wife, they moved into, a little 1-bedroom studio apartment is all they could afford. And it was just a very difficult time starting over. So a few years, after Constantine began working as a dishwasher, started to pick up some English, someone suggested that he should check out the Finger Lakes because, the Finger Lakes has a very long history of producing wine. The wine being produced here, in the mid-1800s and, before Prohibition, it was a booming wine industry. And those grapes were Concord, Catawba, Niagara, the kind of grapey flavors that we more associate today with sort of jams and jellies. That was like the big production.
Yep. First wines I ever drank.
Oh, sure.
Widmer Lake, Niagara in the square bottle.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
I think I used to put it in my bong when I was in high school. Yeah. It was that kind of wine.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's great. So that was
distract
still
you with that, but
that's great. That's a good sign. So that was very widely available. And Constantine came up here. He took a bus. It took him 11 hours, which today from New York City to Geneva would take maybe 4 hours. It took him 11 hours.
Oh yeah.
And he basically went to the Geneva Experiment Station first because he was a scientist. That's where he thought that he could get a position. And he was so perplexed. Why is there no Chardonnay? Why is there no Riesling? No Pinot Noir? And of course, this man with his broken English, he's older, no credibility. No one listened to him. They just kind of pushed him off to the side. And basically, he did get a position there hoeing blueberries, which was a step up from washing dishes. And eventually met a man named Charles Fournier, who was a winemaker at Gold Seal Vineyards, which is no longer in operation, but it was a very famous winery, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And Charles was originally from Champagne, France. So Charles and Constantine were able to communicate in French without any problem. And Charles was so impressed with Constantine that he hired him to be the director of research at Gold Seal.
Oh, wow.
And we actually, this winter, we've been doing some cleaning, and we found the letter that Charles Fournier wrote on gold seal letterhead to Constantine,
Oh, that's
inviting
amazing.
him, get this, with a salary of 1,800 a year in
What year was this?
1954.
That's not bad for 54.
Yeah, I think it's
You can buy
okay.
a house for that, probably.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, Constantine was excited with that prospect. And in that same year, 1954, he began his grafting method that he had practiced in Ukraine, where he grafted American rootstock with vinifera, the European species, because that was resistant to a pest found here called phylloxera,
Right.
which had devastated vineyards in Europe. Constantine had dealt with that problem there. He knew exactly what to do here. He just needed someone to give him a chance.
That's good.
And when those trials were successful, Gold Seal did not want to rip out all of the other, American varieties and French American hybrids. So that's why Constantine really went out on his own and basically started his own experiment station. So just a real scientist. He had over 66 different varieties here. He was experimenting not only with different varieties, but with different clones, different rootstocks. He documented everything religiously. We still have his journals. Every
Will you ever
single
publish
vine was
them? Will you publish
documented.
them someday? You should publish
I
them.
think that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
There's like the side notes are in different languages, and it's just very.
That'd
We've
be great.
donated some of them to Cornell for
Mhm.
safekeeping, but I do think it would be really neat.
Yeah. I mean, he's
yeah.
a legendary guy. So when did the winery, was it originally called Chateau Frank? Or what was the original?
Yes.
The original was Chateau
So
Frank, right?
the original winery, based on our still legal name, is Vinifera Wine Cellars.
Okay.
So Chateau Frank actually came in the next generation. Constantine's son, Willie.
Who I was very
who
tight
you-
with.
oh,
He knew
really?
Willie very well. Yeah, I did dinners with him.
Oh, how lovely.
Michael Weiss from the Culinary Institute.
Yes, of course.
He's one of my best friends. He introduced me. Yeah,
Nice.
Willie was one of my faves.
I love that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he loved that I used his wines in almost every wine dinner.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he loved that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Willie and Constantine, I would say they did not always see eye to eye. I think it was a very challenging relationship. They're both big personalities.
Father and son?
Father and son.
Of course they're not going to see eye to eye. They're going to see parallel, but not necessarily eye to eye. That's natural. I have two sons. I know all about it.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, and I do think it's tough, and Willie wanted to carve out a piece of something that, he could really call his own. His father, Constantine, didn't really like the idea of sparkling wine, but Willie was, really adamant that we have the perfect climate, we have the perfect soils. He began, started basically a traditional method sparkling operation. So that was called Chateau Frank, and that's just next door to our winery. So it's a fully operational traditional method. And he had on every bottle Finger Lake champagne up until his passing in 2006, because he said, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah.
So I really I think that he was really onto something, because now we're starting to see, this is over 30 years later since we've been producing this style of sparkling wine. So many producers in the Finger Lakes are jumping on board, and the potential is real. Napa and Sonoma had a lot of outside investment from champagne producers, but we feel that was really due to the marketing, because they had the biggest name. But I think in a few years to come, we'll see a lot more outside investment in our region, because it really is perfect.
And I think, honestly, I think that your sparklers are among the top American sparklers out there. There's a couple of sparklers from the West Coast that I like.
Sure.
Iron Horse comes to mind.
Very good producer.
But Iron Horse is down in the Green Valley, where it's much cooler.
Sure.
And it has more of that real champagne flavor. But I love you. I love your brutes.
Thank you very much.
I love Celebra. I've been using that for starters for wine dinners forever. Nothing better with some spicy sushi and oysters in that wine.
Yes.
So that
Perfect.
Celebra is a Riesling Chardonnay blend, right?
Yep, the Celebrity is actually just 100% Riesling.
Oh, it's 100%. Has it always been 100%
Yeah,
Riesling?
it's funny you say that because you have such a long history knowing us. I believe there was some Pinot Blanc in there
Oh,
for a
Pinot Blanc.
time,
Yeah, yeah.
but yes, currently it's just 100% Riesling.
Delicious. If you guys haven't, people out there have not ever tried Celebra, and some people call it Celebre because it ends with an E with an accent on it.
Mhm.
Try it. Try it for lunch. Try it for breakfast. Try it late night. It's great. So you've got your
It's great.
sparkling business. What are some of the disasters as far as trying to grow a particular varietal that just turned out to not hit the spot for you? What I know, we know we've got the Rieslings, the Gewurz, our Cacciatelli.
Mhm.
Really good job with your Chardonnay grapes. How about any duds in your history that
Oh
you kind of
yeah,
don't make anymore? And
sure.
don't be worried. If it's too embarrassing, I'll edit it out.
No embarrassment here. Yeah, we Constantine was really the experimenter. I mean, we continue to experiment with
Mhm.
different varieties, but he really laid the groundwork. And he had so many varieties that were just not well suited just to try them.
Mhm.
So one example would be Pedro Jimenez. I have no idea. That's like such a
That's what
hot
they make
climate
sherry out of. Yeah.
variety.
Well, that's the sherry grape. That's similar to like a
Yes, exactly.
Trebbiano. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So very funny. And he had
Excuse me. I want to tell you a funny story. You know where that name?
sure.
There's a. It's kind of a lore tale, but that
Hmm.
Pedro Jimenez was actually a German man named Peter Zimmer. That's what the sherry guys tell you. And he came down to
That's funny.
southern Spain to plant grapes. But anyway,
Mm.
onward with that.
I
Enjoy
didn't
your
know that
coffee.
story. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you know who Steve Olson is. He's the sherry guy. He does the
Okay. I love sherry.
Jerez. He does
Mm-hmm.
these amazing all day
Mm.
immersions. But he said,
Mm.
no one knows whether it's really true, but there's one of the folklore stories that a German winemaker named Peter Zimmer came down to Jerez
Sure.
to make wine. Anyway, that's
Oh, very
neither here nor
interesting.
there.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. I learned
yeah,
something.
well, hey, you never know.
um,
So tell me about some of the problems or issues or
mhm.
the victories you've had with red grapes. We know the
Sure.
Finger Lakes really excels at white wine, right? And
Mm.
it's got the right climate. Red
Mhm.
grapes often need a little more ripening time to get the full
Mhm.
fruit flavor. So what have you had successes with, and what have you found to be not the strongest grapes to grow up there?
Sure. Yeah. So we're about 80% white focus in our
Hmm.
production, but we do a variety of reds, just smaller, quantities. So Pinot Noir, we actually have the second oldest planting of Pinot Noir in America, second to Hansel in
Hmm.
Sonoma. So the vines are planted in 1958.
Wow,
Yeah, so super
that's older than
interesting.
me. Jesus, that's really old.
That's great. Yeah, so Pinot Noir is notoriously, a very difficult variety to grow, but it does need a cool climate.
Hmm.
So as long as we keep enough airflow, through the canopy, and because of the, incredibly old vines, we're naturally getting less yield, so a lot more concentration.
Hmm.
But we also do, Blaufränkisch, the Austrian variety that
Hmm.
does very well. Cabernet Franc is really probably the most known red variety in the Finger Lakes.
Yeah, and probably I would think the most successful, right? It seems
Mm-hmm.
to thrive there, and it's a delicious grape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Separavi is the newcomer. I mean, we've had it planted since the 50s. It's another Georgian variety. So it's like our Cacciatelli's red sidekick, if
Okay.
you will.
Red sidekick.
Yes. And it actually has color juice.
Oh,
It's a Teinturier variety. So one of the few varieties in the world that if you squeeze, a bunch of Separavi, your
mhm.
hand will be stained for the rest of
Wow.
the day. Whereas if you went to Napa and, picked up a bunch of, Cab Sauv, you would have clear juice running
Yeah.
through.
Hmm.
So it's just an incredibly pigmented juice, which is a perfect variety for us because, like you mentioned, we're not known for heavy, full-bodied styles of red, and Separavi is kind of the answer to that. So there's a lot of interest now in that variety. with
Would you
people
use it more
planting
as a
it.
blending grape or as a dominant grape?
Yeah, we do a blend with it.
Mhm.
Kind of our most premium blend is has a portion of Separavi, but we also do a straight bottled Separavi.
I haven't tried it. I'd like to try it.
Oh, I'll send you some, Rick.
Yeah. Have you ever tasted Gamay Noir?
Yes, we actually used to have Gamay on the property.
No, the
A
Gamay
lot of
Noir, the Gamay Noir hybrid from Cornell.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Gamay. No, we don't, we don't plant any hybrids just
Mhm.
because of Constantine's, legacy with
Yeah.
vinifera.
hmm
But I don't believe I've tried that hybrid. There
It's
are kind of,
actually great. There's
okay.
a small winery along the White Cliffs of New Paltz, which is
Mm,
very chalky soil.
mm-hmm,
And they started growing Gamay Noir, and it is probably one of the 3 or 4 best reds I've had in New York. It just
mm,
delicious. It tastes
interesting.
like Burgundy. I mean, it really tastes
Sure.
like Gamay.
Mm-hmm,
Um, Tell me about the classics, Cabernet, Sauvignon,
sure.
and Merlot, your trials and tribulations with that. Do you still grow them?
We do actually, and
Mhm.
just because we have very old vines, of especially with Cab Sauv,
hmm
but Merlot as well. And I wouldn't say that they're, the most well suited, but we certainly produce very interesting, very elegant styles of
hmm
them, especially Cab Sauv,
hmm
And one of the things we've found, speaking about red varieties, is we've really over the years adjusted the oak treatment, so we're really not using barely any new oak.
hmm
That's a really important part for us because the flavors are so delicate and we can't cover that up, with
Right.
too much new oak.
Yeah.
So that's an important winemaking consideration. But you have these higher acid, more kind of elegant
hmm
reds that are going to age tremendously well because of their acidity, and pick up a lot of very interesting secondary, tertiary notes. So we had a tasting, gosh, was it last year? About, I believe it was Cab Sauv and Cab Francs from all the way back to the 1970s,
Yeah.
and the wines were still alive. It
Yeah.
was incredible.
That's great.
They're really meant to age, and they're meant to stand the test of time, which is
Do you release
really
them
neat.
fresh or do you sit on them for a while?
We do sit on them for a while. So traditionally, especially with Cab Sauv, we're aging for 18 months, and
hmm
then they'll have a year or two of bottle age.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so
You
I
know,
like to.
one of my
Mhm.
challenges, I mean, one of my passions is wine and food pairing. It's what I've been doing
Mm,
my whole career.
that's great.
And one of my challenges with New Yorkers, people from
Mm-hmm.
New York who like wine, is getting them to appreciate and understand what New York wines are all about, right?
Sure.
And I try to make the analogy, if you lived in Puglia, you would drink Negro Amaro and Primitivo. If you
Mm,
lived in Loire, you would drink Sancerre and Cabernet Franc.
sure.
And the expectation that a wine called Cabernet Sauvignon is supposed to taste like a Napa Cabernet Sauvignon,
Mm,
or a wine called Pinot Noir is supposed to taste like a California Pinot Noir, which frankly
right.
I prefer European Pinot Noirs anyway, is a challenge. I've actually done, you'll love this, Meaghan.
Mm,
I do these 6 glass tastings, right? I put 6
mm-hmm.
glasses in front of you, start with the lightest white and with the heaviest red. And then I
Mm,
send out little pairs of food, plain and sauce. So it'll be like
mm.
a mushroom and then a mushroom and hoisin sauce, a poached egg and then a deviled egg with wasabi, just so you can see what
That
happens when
sounds
food
great.
changes and how it works with wine. And I've actually had people at these tastings not drink the white. I don't
Wow.
drink, they say, I don't drink white. I'm like, so it's like, I don't listen to jazz. I know, but if it's on in the grocery store, you're going to leave. I mean, it's like, what kind of, do you find that to be a challenge with people that come to the vineyard and want to taste wine, the red wine drinkers having a different expectation, expecting something that we just don't do. We do something different?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's so interesting you say that. And I really have to commend you on that. I think, with food, wine becomes a totally different thing. And we're making the wines to have with food,
hmm
so you putting that in their, natural environment, as you will, I think is the best place for them. But yeah, there is a little bit of, especially with Riesling, people will say, oh, I don't drink sweet wine.
Hmm.
We say, well, Riesling doesn't have to be sweet.
Hmm.
There's a variety of styles. And one of our most popular wines is our dry Riesling, and it's
Yeah,
bone dry.
it's great.
So
But as
it
far as
is,
sweet wine goes, you just put a couple of nice
oh,
spicy shrimp,
yes. Oh, I have
spicy
nothing
shrimp
against,
tacos in
love
front of
it.
them. I mean, I
Absolutely.
find I've had my staff who are like kind of reluctant to sweet wines,
Mm-hmm.
even when they taste them straight up, and then I'll put out
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little curry or some spicy
Mm.
shrimp tacos and say, now taste this traditional Riesling with it.
Yes.
And they go, oh my God, what a delicious flavor combo. One of our little
Absolutely.
tricks that you will love in our restaurant, because we pour your Riesling, not the dry,
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
is I have a fair amount of dishes that are authentically spiced, like a couple of Thai
Mm.
dishes and Caribbean style dishes, and they're hot, and I don't give a shit. I make them.
Mm-hmm.
I make them the way they're supposed to be made, and
Sure.
you enjoy them the way they're supposed to be made. And someone will maybe order like the worst possible wine pairing, like they'll order a glass of Malbec, and then
No.
order green curry scallops for dinner. And first of all, if I see that, I'm never gonna tell anybody they're incorrect, right? I never
Sure.
like to lord it over people. What I do instead, to train my servers to pour about 2 ounces of your Riesling in a glass, make sure it's nice and cool,
Mm-hmm.
bring it over and say, Rick says, taste this wine with your food. And they
Mm.
all say the same thing. I say, oh my God, it's like a fire hydrant.
Yes,
The
it
heat
comes the
went right
heat.
down. Oh my God, I had no idea. And, do they go out to the store and buy it? They may, but they
Yeah.
certainly tell the story that, wow, when
Mm-hmm.
you're eating something spicy, you really shouldn't drink Malbec or,
Mm-hmm.
$6 a bottle cab that's going to just taste like tar. That's part of the educational process,
Yes.
getting people to understand how their palate responds to just the
Mm-hmm.
reactions of food and wine, and how your wines are so great with spicy food
So
and
true.
salty foods. And when I say spicy and salty, I'm talking about basically anything along the equator. Everything
Mm.
from South Asian, Indian,
Mm-hmm.
certain types of Mediterranean, Mesoamerican, Caribbean, Latin.
Mm.
Your wines are great with that.
Absolutely.
You should have me make your food tastings in your tasting room.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you're so right. And I completely agree with that. I think, the worst decision, it's so funny when I was in Australia, the styles of wine are changing a little bit in trend, but if you go to Barossa Valley, you're having a Shiraz that's going to be 15, maybe 15.5% alcohol.
Hmm.
Ordering that, I once went out to an Indian restaurant. They have amazing Asian cuisine there in Australia, and the group I was with ordered this Shiraz, and I'll never forget how uncomfortable that was.
Yeah.
So I completely agree, and I think once people have that experience, they never forget it.
Let me tell you something kind of odd that Michael Weiss and I have experimented with it with big
Hmm.
reds and spicy food. And winemakers probably will cringe at this, but humans drink wine and you've chilled them a bit.
Sure. Hmm.
And suddenly you can get
Hmm.
away with drinking a high acid red or a big fat red
Sure.
spicy dish. And as a person who runs a winery, how do you feel about someone cooling down your red a bit?
Oh, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I think there's too much pretension in wine, and I'm sure too, you're experimenting so much with different food pairings, and sometimes you come up with an unexpected combination.
Hmm.
White wine isn't always meant to pair with fish. Maybe there's a lighter bodied red, or the sauce changes it,
Hmm.
and there's just so many combinations that I think
White wine is
nothing is
really
kind of
good with
off the
steak,
table.
by the way. White
Oh
wine can be
yes,
really good with
sure.
steaks, especially
Absolutely.
yeah, especially a bigger white and a fattier steak. Yeah.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit
So
about your Chardonnay,
interesting.
because I really like your Chardonnay.
Yeah,
It's really
absolutely.
kind
I
of a
think,
little apple essence to it. It kind of tastes like upstate New York to me.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Chardonnay is very interesting. We actually, we have pretty old vines of that as well,
Mm-hmm.
going back to 1968. And the Chardonnay that we have, it's actually where I'm sitting right now in the Zoom. You can see behind me is actually our Chardonnay block.
Mm-hmm.
And the clone is referred to in the Finger Lakes as the Dr. Frank clone.
Oh wow.
So nobody really knows the exact origin. I mean, it's said to be from a Burgundian clone, but that's widely found, in the Finger Lakes, the Dr. Frank clone of Chardonnay. So that's kind of an interesting
Do you get royalties on every grape that's grown with that name?
Unfortunately, no. But it is nice to know that that there is a particular clone that's widely spread from us. But we like the reds, we're not using a lot of oak. Usually 50% stainless steel, 50% oak fermented, and then half is matured. Just to keep that fresh acidity.
Yeah.
And you can see kind of behind me, we have just a lot of shale deposits in the soil. So that's going to contribute to a really interesting kind of mineral focus with a lot of our wines.
Yeah.
Chardonnay included.
That's great. I think the Chardonnays are really surprisingly delicious, and I recommend them a lot. Get moving forward here. I just want to talk about the Riesling phenomenon nationally. How has that affected you guys? Are your Riesling sales up?
Yes.
And are your Riesling sales up outside of the region? I mean, you're selling more nationally, internationally? Do you sell internationally?
We do in a few select markets. Yeah, Riesling is, that's our bread and butter. It's definitely, while there are some that, have preconceived notions about Riesling, it's definitely, become kind of a Somm wine. Chefs like yourself have done a lot of groundwork in laying this, idea that Riesling pairs with so many different foods, and I think that's led to kind of a big trend with Riesling. And I was just in Japan actually before the pandemic broke out. Very lucky to go. It was my first time. And we sell a ton of Riesling in Japan actually.
That makes
they're
sense.
our biggest export market. Yeah, and the Riesling pairs so incredibly well with a variety of their cuisine.
Riesling and soy sauce are perfect together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and soy sauce is everywhere. How much Riesling do you bottle every year? How many cases?
Yeah, so Riesling, it's a 60% of what we produce. So we make 9 different styles of Riesling. So there's quite a lot, and we keep adding more. Like we've just added 2 single vineyard Rieslings a few years ago. And then some years we'll do a Botrytis Riesling if the conditions permit it.
What is that? Explain that to
Sure.
the uninitiated out there. It sounds like a sports industry injury.
Yeah, I know, it sounds funny.
Yeah, Botrytis of my knee.
Yeah, it's not great to describe. So Botrytis is actually it's the noble rot. So basically, in very humid mornings, and you sometimes we'll get a mist coming off of the lake, in the mornings, and then that mist dries out in the afternoon sun. And what can take hold is Botrytis cinerea, which is this rot that's actually a very positive rot, even though rot's not a great word.
Is it like a yeast almost?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So the spores, collect, and basically it takes hold of the cluster, and it basically changes the whole chemistry of the grape. So it increases the acidity, increases the sugar content, and you get like a shriveling effect. So the berries kind of collapse under themselves. And when you squeeze, a handful of raisins, you can imagine you get 1 drop of liquid. It's so incredibly concentrated. And the resulting wine, is higher in sugar and higher in acidity. So it has this beautiful kind of synergy, with the acidity and the sweetness. And,
like the Amaronia of Riesling almost.
Yeah. And I mean, like Sautern, Tokai, Trockenbeer and Auslese in Germany, those, some of the finest dessert wines in the world are all made with Botrytis. So in certain years, we can make an excellent Botrytis Riesling, but it doesn't happen every year.
What's your best seller of the Rieslings?
Probably, it's different in different markets. Since this is the Upstate podcast.
I don't care. We're introducing the world to Upstate. Trying.
Upstate is actually our semi-dry Riesling, which we just
This is what we pour by the glass. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so
we just got a great score for it in Wine Enthusiast.
It's delicious. It is so delicious, and it's so interesting to introduce people to something that their preconceived notion is they're just not going to like, and then they actually put it in
Sure.
their mouth and they're like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
the idea of taking the term sweet wine
Mm-hmm.
and having that spread across something as a beautifully made proper Riesling
Mm-hmm.
and something like Boone's Farm, they're not,
Sure.
it's not, and we have to somehow get in people's head that that's not the same thing. You're not tasting like Kool-Aid with grape flavor.
Right.
You're tasting this amazing complexity and layers of flavor, long
Mm-hmm.
finish and refreshing. And boy, I'm sitting on the deck. I wish it was 20 degrees cooler because I'd break a bottle out. And you know, I'm the type of guy that does things that, I don't know if this pisses off winemakers, but I'll throw a slice of peach in it
Oh,
if I'm
sure.
sitting
Why
on the
not?
deck and just drink it
Mm-hmm.
and relax because it's such so
Yeah,
much fun to quaff, you know.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
that's your best seller. How
it
about around
is.
the other parts of the country?
Yeah, so in like the larger cities, the dry Riesling is
Yeah,
probably our best seller. But
good.
between those two are the lion's share of the production.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean they're basically what the winery's reputation was built upon, you
Yep,
know, those two wines.
that's great. So where do you see yourself and Dr. Frank Winery in the next 10 years?
Oh geez. Yeah, well, we're continuing, you know, to expand. We have purchased just an additional 30 acres on the east side of Seneca.
Hmm.
So we're going to be working with, you know, planting a bit more Pinot Noir for our sparkling program. We're expanding that
Oh,
tremendously.
good. How are
Yes,
sparkling sales? Are they good?
very good. Yeah. I mean, right now it's a little different because I feel that maybe in the pandemic people aren't
Celebrating?
drinking as much sparkling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Even though, you know, sparkling, as you know, pairs so wonderfully and
yeah.
it should be an everyday beverage, especially at our prices.
It should be an
Um,
everyday beverage. Absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, I think that, you know, we'll bounce back with the sparkling and before the pandemic happened, you know, the sparkling sales were record numbers for us and we've, you know, increased our efficiency in the cellar as well by, you know, adding some new pieces of equipment from Champagne to make it a little bit faster to produce.
Hmm.
But I'd say we're, you know, we're going to expand the sparkling operation. We've expanded our guest experiences in the last 5 years by offering some food and wine pairings, some
Hmm.
cheese flights. So I'd love to get your feedback on those, Rick. We've been thinking a lot about what we can do to give back.
Hmm.
And one of the things we decided on a few weeks ago is we're donating 10% of the proceeds of our Helm series, which is a collection of 4 wines named after the women of our family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're donating 10% to our local food pantry, the
Hmm.
Hope Center Cuca Food Pantry. And so that's been really rewarding. We started that March 1st. So I think, you know, we'll continue to think of ways that we can give back and, you know, think of the community right now. And, you know, we do have this feeling that we're all in this together. We're getting so many encouraging calls from customers, so much
Yeah.
support, and we really, you know,
Uh,
appreciate that.
Right. And listening to the governor yesterday, you can kind of read between the lines. Your area will probably be some of the earlier areas to
Right.
reopen in New York because you're less
Mhm.
densely populated.
Mhm.
Is the can you stop at the winery and buy wine now? Is the
You
retail
can.
open? You can, right?
Yeah, so we are doing curbside pickup. We're shipping, you know, UPS and FedEx.
Hmm.
We're doing a shipping special right now, free shipping on 6 bottles. And
Wow.
then we have some quantity discounts as well. We also have a program called Staff Stories where we highlight a staff member every 2 or 3 days, and they pick their favorite wine, their favorite at-home activity, which
Hmm.
we've had people choose between hula hooping and fishing and podcasts. And
Yeah.
podcast is actually mine.
Uh-huh.
And then their favorite at-home meal with like pantry stock items. So it's been
Oh,
a lot of
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
And then those you know, for their chosen wine, they get 20% off any orders. So yeah, that's
Excellent.
been a fun way to keep everyone kind of busy and morale up and
Good.
but yeah,
Well,
definitely we're open for retail purchases.
well, you got a great personality. I'm sure it's easy for you to
Oh,
keep
thank
morale
you.
up.
Oh,
I want to
thank
thank you, Meaghan. This is Meaghan Frank, Vice President of Operations, right? Is that what you are? Vice President of Operations?
I hate
Vice
my title
President?
so much. It's so corporate, and
Well,
we're a team of 20 people, so it's funny, but my dad's all about the professionalism. So
yes, that's right. Wear your uniform. From Dr. Frank Wines in the Finger Lakes, one of the flagship wineries on the eastern part of America, and definitely from the Finger Lakes. We love your wine. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Rick.
spending some time with me. Good.